Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on Itama. Right now we are in my backyard and you can actually behold the beautiful greenery and the spring in the air, the beautiful wildflowers and delicious smells of fragrances of fruit trees that are blossoming. And yes, tomorrow is going to be Rosh Chodesh, the new month, and we are going to celebrate Nisan, the month of redemption. And we will be able to bless over the trees, our custom once a year to do that in Israel. And this lesson, first of all, before I begin, I want to relate this entire lesson in the memory of a friend of mine's father. His name is Shmuel ben Harav Zvulun, and he passed away on the month of Nisan. And it's his yurtzeit. And therefore this lesson will be dedicated to his memory and his Ilui Nishmato. And here in the land of Israel, those of you who live outside of Israel can experience a little bit of the beauty of the land. You see everything is green and how, yes, redemption is in the air. This lesson I want to focus on modesty, and I want to begin by relating to a Gemara. Interesting Gemara in Nidarim, in the tractate of Nidarim, which was brought down by the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Netzato, in his famous work, The Path of the Just, and he brings down this Gemara when he talks about the topic of modesty, which is our topic of today's lesson. I want to relate modesty, the whole concept, to the book of Leviticus, to the book of Vayikrah, in the opening of the book. And the Gemara is like this. Ahu Baal Bavel, there was a Babylonian who moved to Israel, came to the land of Israel, and apparently he married an Israeli woman. He was a Babylonian Jew, and he married an Israeli Jew. And they had some language difficulties, so he said to his wife, please make me 2 lentils. And she actually cooked him 2 lentils. Now, what did he mean? It was an expression, make me, we say in English, make me a couple, I'll have a couple. You don't mean exactly 2, but she did exactly what he said, and she made him 2. And then he goes on to say, okay, he got pretty angry, and so he told her to make him a large amount, a full amount, like a storehouse, and she really made him a storehouse, like a huge amount. That was enough for 100 people, for one person. So she really tried to follow her husband to the T and to do his will, but she just didn't understand. And then he goes on and says to her, bring me 2 butsine, which in Aramaic means squash, and she ended up bringing him 2 candles, and he got really upset, and he tells her, okay, take these 2 candles and break it on the doorpost. And in Aramaic, doorposts the entrance is called a bava. So outside her house, there was a great rabbinical leader of Israel. He was the greatest leader at that time, named Bav ben Buta. His name was Bava, so she thought her husband meant to break it on him, so she broke these 2 candlesticks over the head of his great leader, Bav ben Buta. And instead of the rabbi being upset with her, he says, why do you do it? And what happened here? And she says, well, I'll tell you the truth. My husband told me to do it, so I did what he said. He goes, wow, you really follow your husband's word. You're going to be blessed to have 2 sons like Bav ben Buta, like him, who's a great leader. And that's exactly what happened. So this is the story, one of the stories brought down in the chapter of modesty. And wow, if you look at the story, it says, it almost seems to be, in a lot of ways, the exact opposite of modesty. Number one, he has a husband who's grouchy and trying to communicate to his wife. He's not doing a good job about it. And his wife is trying her best to please him, but not doing a good job on her end. And then you have this poor leader of Israel getting smashed over the head with two candlesticks. On the other hand, he's blessing her, you will have 2 sons like me. Wow, I am pretty special. You will be blessed with that. So where is modesty? How does this story teach us about modesty? Well, of course, when I begin to go a little deeper into the story, I hope I'll be able to relate that message to you. But before we get back to this story, I want to, the book of Leviticus I mentioned deals with modesty, so I want to show in a few ways how this is true, or how this is the message that I got from this week's portion. And number one, it opens up by saying Vayikrah El Moshe, and God calls to Moshe Rabbeinu. And if we all look in the Hebrew, we see very clearly that the Hebrew has a little aleph in it. It's a small little letter. And this you can only make out, of course, by reading the Torah in Hebrew. So the question is, why here the Torah uses regular letters, except here he uses a little small aleph? And of course we know that it is the way of in Judaism to try to decipher and understand these special deep hints within the Torah, and therefore if it was our tradition to write the aleph, a small letter, it means something. Well, I read in of the famous Hasidic master, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Mibilditchev, in his Kedushat Levi, in his great work called Kedushat Levi, he writes that Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the most modest individual of all time, therefore the Allah reflects his modesty. But all the more so. If we look at Rashi, and Rashi explains what is this calling to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Rashi goes out and says, brings down the Midrashim, that for all the different commandments that God gave to Moshe Rabbeinu, and to pass over to Jewish people, and the commandments and the diburim, which are when he actually spoke. The Torah uses different terminology. Sometimes it says Vayidaber, and he spoke, and sometimes it says Vayitzav, and he commanded. Sometimes it says Vayomer, and he said. Different forms of speaking, of relating to Moshe Rabbeinu. There was always a calling that preceded this. It's always started with a Vayikrah. God called. And the question, of course, is why? Well, number one, we can look at it that as relating to Moshe Rabbeinu's modesty. Moshe Rabbeinu he always remained outside. He never looked at himself as being someone special or someone unusual. He always looked at himself as really being nothing. As of course it says in the Torah that Aaron and Moshe Rabbeinu said about themselves, we are nothing. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu looked at himself as nothing. And therefore he was almost embarrassed to go inside, to enter this holy area. Only when Hashem would have to call him and say, Moshe, I'm talking to you. Moshe Rabbeinu waited for that, not trying to, again, being completely nullifying himself of every kind of self-glory and honor. Moshe Rabbeinu had to be called and invited by God because he wouldn't come by himself. That's how modesty was. That's an example, of course, of his great modesty. Another interesting portion of modesty here, a lesson of modesty in the beginning of Vayikrah, we see the fact that we know that in Hebrew, in the Torah, that's divided into different portions, not the portions of the week only, that's a later division, but there are a much, much more ancient division of smaller portions that the Torah is divided, called Parshiot. And there are two types. I think I've spoken this about in the past, closed portions and open portions, but these are the ancient divisions of the Torah. And here, very interesting, is that this division opens up with Vayikrah, calling to Moshe, and then, of course, what God says to Moshe Rabbeinu about teaching about sacrifice. But the next portion that's connected, which is in verse 10, there it just goes into the next thing without any kind of opening. So the question that Rashi brings down and the rabbis ask is, why is there a division if it just goes into the next portion without having another additional, like a prophetical introduction, like Vayidaber, God spoke to you or commanded you? Why is there a division there? And the answer that Rashi brings down, according to the Midrash, is that to allow for reflection, allow for a time of reflection. Which means that if Moshe Rabbeinu needed a time, who was taught by God, who needed time to absorb, all the more so when a regular person studies, he should have time to reflect and not go on, think about, try to really understand what he was taught by his teacher. And of course, there's another lesson of modesty, in that a person sometimes, he thinks he knows it all. He's a fast, quick catch. He can really pick things up very quickly. I understand it already. No. Every time there's something that is taught in the Torah, or anything in life, there is a lot of depth behind it. Look around us. Look at the beauty of nature. Every little thing, every little flower, every little insect reflects upon the greatness of God that is hidden within everything. And all the more so, of course, when it comes to Torah study, there's such depth behind it. And therefore, don't say, I know it all, I understand right away. Stop, contemplate, think about what you were taught, and then go on only. And this, again, these are three lessons of modesty that are taught right out here in the beginning of the book of Leviticus, again, by God calling to Moshe, although Moshe really thought he was nothing, he had to be invited all the time. And not only that, to enter the Holy of Holies, we know that the high priest only entered once a year, on the holiday of Yom Kippur, and Moshe Rabbeinu was able to enter all the time. He could have easily said, wow, I can walk in without being invited, but he wanted to wait for that call to be invited. And then again, as I mentioned before, the division of the portions, again to show that there must be reflection in time, give a little time to think before we actually act. And these again are important lessons of modesty, which we have to constantly go over and teach ourselves. Relating to the story I mentioned, which is brought down by the Ramchal when he teaches about modesty, this story seems to be very unusual, and I want to now connect this story we just read here, what is this whole story of a woman and trying to follow husband's words, and the husband seems to be completely frustrated about his communication? Well, again, as I mentioned before, every midrash, every Talmudic passage has a great depth behind it. Sometimes people read all these crazy Jews with their stories, a woman hitting a great rabbi over the head with candlesticks. So, purposely, a person could try to think and arrogantly feel that, well, this is ridiculous stupidity. But on the other hand, if he's a modest person and he has the keys of understanding Torah, he realized that our rabbis must have hinted something very, very deep behind this story to teach us a real, true lesson of modesty. And that's exactly what I want to try to relate a few words about this. And again, just a taste of what I feel that how this teaches about modesty. Number one, if we think about it, what is this Babylon person coming from Babylon? Babylon represents in Hebrew, comes from the word Bavel, meaning to confusion. And that's the Tower of Babylon that they were all united against God, and God just confused their language and everyone went crazy, etc. That was the punishment of the Tower of Babylon. But Bavel, a person coming from Babylon, is hinted to this confusion in this world. In this world we have a situation of a lot of times of confusion, of lack of understanding. This lack of understanding, there's two ways of dealing with it. It can create either a response of modesty and accepting the other person, trying to understand what the other person is trying to say to us, or we can react angrily and do the opposite. And here, this relationship with a husband and a wife is only an example, but it's a relationship, of course, that has to do with man and God, a relationship, of course, with man and all humanity, how it relates to one another. And confusion could be the cause of a lot of arrogance. But on the other hand, if we relate it with understanding, we can actually turn around and use the beauty of modesty to resolve the confusion. And that's really what was supposed to be done over here. Now, this husband that gets angry and he's asking his wife for these adashim, why does it really mention the lentils? Lentils, of course, represent the cycle of life. They're round. We're familiar with them in the story of Jacob and Esau. But we know that it represents a circle of life, and a person in lifetime sometimes is up on the top and he feels really, wow, I'm up here on the high post over here on top of the mountain, but tomorrow he's going to be in the ground. So realize that life turns around. You may be in a good position now. One day you're going to be on the bottom. Know your place in this world. And that, again, is an example of modesty hinted within that. If we go on to the story of the husband is sort of building up to, like this he keeps asking, she's really not doing what she wants to. One day we'll see a woman that's really trying to do husband's will. She's completely, in one hand we can look at her as being completely devoted and trying to do the will of the husband. And instead of him being appreciating that and trying to communicate, but he's building up his anger. And then he goes ahead, and when he asked her to bring the squash, which in Hebrew it's called kishu, she thought it meant the Aramaic word butzina, meaning candles. Now, a lot of times, in difficulty in this world, we could take difficulty and confusion, and for us, it could become a candle to light, to lead us and to guide us. And the husband, instead of realizing that, he gets angry, takes these candles and breaks them over the door, and she ends up, of course, breaking it over this great leader of Israel, Bav ben Buta. The question we can ask ourselves, wow, wait a second, Bav ben Buta, what does he have to do with this whole story? He's this great leader. Why does he have to hit over the head with these two candles? And one way we can look at it as anyone who's a leader, anyone who has responsibility over others, obviously has to, what goes on in personal homes of individuals is part of his personal responsibility as well. He can't say, well, this has nothing to do with me. It is that when something goes on, there's a problematic situation in the world, great leaders are responsible for what goes on in the world. And even every home. And therefore, when he got hit over the head, instead of realizing, wow, do I deserve this? He was accepting it from Hashem, this makkah, that he received, this blow that he received, and he's first of all he's blessing her, and she's going to have two great sons, be like him. But instead of being angry and being upset, he was accepting that this was all from Hashem, the situation, and God was trying to say something to him personally. Maybe he could have been involved at the fact that it was an issue of family, and it was right near his doorstep. He, as a leader, could have been more responsible to try to resolve that difficult conflict. And of course, he answered to the call of the hour by receiving it properly and blessing her and the two great sons. So they'll be like him, which of course, this will bring great peace into that home, with all the difficulty in communication, when they were married and have such beautiful sons that came out of that relationship, of course that would rectify any struggle between husband and wife personally. And that, of course, is one of the deep messages behind this. But another important deep message, in my opinion, is the relationship between us and God. Many times in our lives, there are things that we do not understand, things that are way beyond our capacity of understanding. And we would like the situation of our lives to go smoothly, to go in the direction we want them to go, but a lot of times Hashem says, no, I'm going to show you the way I want it. And we have to accept that. And that's here, the husband wanting a certain way, but the wife doing it some other way, right? So that's hints to this kind of concept between man and God. No, sometimes it doesn't go the way you want. Sometimes life is going to have obstacles, and it's not going to go exactly the way you planned it. And we have to learn to accept it and not learn, to break it or to do it or to go against the difficulties that come. We have to learn to flow, go with the flow, as they say. And it's exactly the deep lesson, I think, of the whole book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus, which deals with sacrifice and great concepts that are very difficult for us to understand, of taking animals and slaughtering it and pouring the blood here and gathering the blood and sprinkling it 7 times here and this time here and around the corner, all kinds of things which seem very, very difficult to understand, and very, very intricate details of what does this all mean? What is this meaning behind all these things? But here we have to say, wow, sometimes Hashem we don't understand. Just like with the red heifer, King Solomon said, how much am I wise, but this is far from me, far from my understanding. And from this, the whole entire Torah, we learn a lesson that it's all far from our understanding and a level. We can understand things on a certain level, but obviously we're limited as human beings, and this whole concept of sacrifice is very difficult for a human being to understand. But here our modesty has to come into play and realize that, okay, we don't understand, but Hashem is the one who leads the picture. And that's the great connection, in my opinion, of the portion of Leviticus of Vayikrah with modesty. Moshe Rabbeinu being called here this is an example of every time God spoke to me, he was called. It was a calling. But it was chosen to teach us about modesty here in this week's portion, because nothing greater than understanding the whole concept of the sacrifice requires modesty. Our modesty. Realize, God, sometimes we just don't know, and we try our best to serve you and to be a good servant to Hashem, but a lot of times we just don't know why things happen the way they do. But we have to follow and go with the flow, and sometimes get hit over the head with candlesticks to realize that. But we have to realize that we have to be modest individuals, and then we can be a light of Torah can shine through us. A person who's a vessel of modesty and allows himself to be a true modest person can only then really receive Torah. That's one of the basic principles of godliness, is working hard and being modest and not being arrogant. What are we? Are nothing in this world. We're just simple individuals that are passing through this cosmos, this lifetime, and we're here for a mission to do God's will and to be good individuals. Let us try to take this lesson to our hearts and improve ourselves day by day, being more modest individuals. The world will be a much greater place to live in. Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you soon. B'sorot Tovot.